everyone, good afternoon. Today I am coming to talk about my research. I'm so happy that after some time I found some other people to present my work. Usually I present my work to Bart or Scott. It's really
that was getting boring. I got the message, thank you.
yeah. But before going to this presentation, first let me give you a very, very quick overview of the stage that I'm gonna take in my PhD. As you may know, my work is in fake news, rumor, disinformation, those kind of stuff. In first step, I'm gonna study the whole field and see the building blocks of the field, the dynamic of the field, even if it's a field or not, it's a scientific field or not. Second, I want to find out some strategies to curb rumors in social media and measure the effectiveness of those strategies. And the third, see how those strategies can be implemented. But for now, I'm in this stage and writing my first paper on this stage, and my presentation will be about this as well. So, in this work, I'm gonna tackle on 5 questions. First, what is the field, and what are the main contributing disciplines on this field? For each of these contributing disciplines, is it a dead discipline, or is it still alive, and researchers are actively contributing to it? Third, how is it evolved through the time, and which aspects are studied in each of those disciplines? Fourth, where are the leaders, I mean the countries, universities, journals, institutes, researchers in this field? And at the end, what will be the orientation of each disciplines in the future, contributing disciplines in the future? First, I'm gonna give you an overview of my answer to first and third question. To do that, I have a 3-layer model. First, I will give you a structural overview of the field, then semantic overview of the field.
What is LDA?
I will explain, but it's an algorithm. This is a graph that shows the number of the papers in this field through the time. As you can see, till 1975, actually nothing happens, just a couple of papers, 1 or 2 papers each year. And from 1975 to 2008, the line climbs up steadily. And from 2008 so far, it rises sharply. This is about 2018, because most of the papers are not indexed yet. It goes on, but definitely it goes on after all the papers were indexed. So this is the trend of the number of the papers in this field. This is the trend of number of contributing disciplines. As you see, it's again a very, very high slope graph that shows each year more disciplines involved in this rumor studies. Please look at this sequence from here. And this is how you have to look at it. Each of these graphs is a discipline graph. Discipline graph is a graph that the node shows disciplines and the edge shows a paper between those disciplines. For example, if this is a discipline number A, this is discipline number B, if there is an edge between them, it shows a paper between those disciplines. From 1944, I think, to 2017, as you see, a number of disciplines increases, and also it goes to more scale-free networks. Scale-free networks are the networks with a few central nodes, with a few nodes with the highest number of the connected edges. Which means, as we are approaching to 2018 to now, the old disciplines are gathering around a few disciplines, which will be mostly quantitative disciplines like computer science and physics. This is the this graph shows the evolvement of this discipline through the time. From here, if you look, this graph also discipline graphs. The yellow nodes are nodes in social science and humanities discipline. The blue ones are in health-related disciplines, and the red ones are quantitative disciplines. Again, as you see, the collaboration between first the quantitative majors, the contribution of quantitative disciplines increases, and also the collaboration between the social science and quantitative science increases as well. So I can say now these disciplines is in the hands of mostly social science and quantitative science. Here, this 4 graphs shows the number of papers in 4 disciplines. First, social science and humanities. Second, computation and analytic discipline. Third, health science. And the fourth one is the rest. As you see, these 2 are the main contributors. These are the structural features of this rumors, so this misinformation studies. But here, I will give you a quick overview of semantic features of this field. This is LDA part. LDA is an algorithm that when you give it a set of documents, a set of text, it will return a call word that those call words represent your documents, your set of documents in a best way. So I gave this algorithm all the papers from 19, I think, 2, something like that, to 2018, and this is the resultant algorithm chosen. As you see, in the first years, most of the words are about disaster, about crisis. I will tell you why those words are dominant in the research in data. But now, from 2006 till now, most of the papers are about social networks, about complex network, how we can model rumor, how we can model a spreading phenomena, those stuff. And this shows, this is a heat map of the keywords in all those papers. Again, as you see, the red part, which is the most popular words are there. Social networks, complex networks, rumor, information. See, now this field is mostly in the hands of quantitative science. So I thought it was not enough, so I went down one more layer, semantic aspects, and start to study 120 years of this research. I just picked the papers with high citation and saw there are actually, the papers will fall into 2 broad categories. The first, external, internal. External research are those research are related to a rumor in certain topic. For example, rumor in health related stuff. For example, if you eat that fruit and if you eat apple and honey, you will be sick. I don't know, this kind of rumors. These papers are about the rumors in different disciplines. For example, or if you do something when it's a full moon, you will do this kind of stuff. But this, the internal rumor research are those research are related to a rumor. For example, what is rumor? What's the consequences of the rumor? Which situation lead to rumor? What would happen if? What kind of rumor will propagate if we have an earthquake? If we have a war? Those papers are also fall into two different categories: a specific context and generic context. A specific context are the paper in a specific context. For example, in organization, in a stock exchange. We have lots of papers here about the rumors, organizational gossip. We have a lot of paper about what would happen to the stock market index when a rumor is spread there. And each of these categories also divided into two more specific ones: modeling approach and non-modeling approach. Here, papers are mostly use a modeling approach. They picked one of the spreading models and use it. Also, but there are also some other papers, mostly in organizational gossip. They use non-modeling approach.
Amir, 2 minutes.
Yes. So that was my research in question number 1 and 3, which were structural features of what is this field and how it was evolved from 120 years ago. The question number 2 was do we know which of those contributing fields is still alive or not? Which one is still contributing in this rumor? So this, I did a very I have 2 minutes, yeah?
1.
1 minute. I made these graphs. Each graph is for one discipline. The green line shows the citation number of papers that cite this field in that year. For example, in 1964, 175 papers cite the papers in anthropology discipline, and the blue graph shows the number of papers in that discipline. If both of this diagram has a decreasing trend, I will say that that discipline is dead in this field and will not contribute in this rumor studies anymore. For question number 4 or 5 about the leaders, about the future, I'm still doing some research, but just give you a quick shot.
That's really the last minute, otherwise we're running late.
Yeah, it's the last slide. It shows the map of the contributing countries in this research. As you see, US and UK has a central role. But maybe you're curious about the Netherlands. So, and these are the countries that Netherlands have most of its collaboration with them. And yeah, that's it. I had more material, but because it was only 10 minutes. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Amir.
Thanks.
I think we can do a couple of questions now, if you have anything, because otherwise we have forgotten by the end of the colloquium. So, if you have anything now that you would like to know,
yeah.
Yes, I'm curious. We always have a lot of disinformation by national governments, for instance, in times of war. Is that something that you take along?
Actually, I only consider the scientific papers, scientific research. But yes, you're right. There are a lot of disinformation in newspaper, in the other resources actually. But these are my results from Web of Science website. When you give them query about rumor, misinformation, disinformation, urban legend. Actually, there are a few words that can explain this field: rumor, disinformation, misinformation, fake news, urban legend, hoax. When I search these terms, these are the results from
They were included.
Yeah.
So, are you able to write a review paper about that?
It's not a review paper. It's mostly kind of bibliometric one, which shows how the field is. Actually, there are a few papers in literature that explain what is this emergent field, what is its characteristic, how it was evolved, and what is its future. It's one of those papers. I will not just talk about this researcher said that, this scholar said that. No, it's not those kind of review papers.
Other questions? If not, thank you, Amir.
Thanks.
I think, Branka, you're next. You have 10 minutes.
Okay.
So, yeah, good afternoon everyone. Thank you for the opportunity here. And in this afternoon, I'm not going to share about my current research project because I'm still at the early phase of that one. So I have nothing yet to present, but I will present about the project that I did for my master thesis, also with people from this section, and the project is still sort of continued even until now. So I think it is quite relevant to be shared here, and as far as I know, the project has not been shared in this forum before as well. So the project is about resilience of the transport network in Bangladesh. We had the World Bank as our client, and then the project started approximately December 2016 until November 2017, so it's almost, the project happened for a year. And basically, besides me, there are also Jan, Alexander, Sibel, and Bahare who participated in the project as well. For those of you who are not familiar with Bangladesh, this is basically the map of Bangladesh, where the country is divided by 3 large rivers. We have the Brahmaputra River, Patma River, and Meghna River. The capital city is just at the heart of Bangladesh. And some important ports are the land border Benapole, bordering Bangladesh with India, and 2 seaports, Mongla and Chittagong. But then 90% of the import and export activities are being done in Chittagong itself. And this is the transport network of Bangladesh. The red line represents the road network and the blue line represents the waterway networks, because there are hundreds or thousands of waterways in Bangladesh. But then approximately 95% of the freight transport activities are being carried out in roads and waterways, and 5% in rail or air transport. The bank was particularly interested in answering 3 questions. The first one is, they want to know, out of these networks, which segments are actually the most important one? And for that, we conducted criticality analysis. The second one, flooding always happens annually in Bangladesh, and how does this annual flood actually influence the performance of the transport system in general? And the third one, there are some predefined investment options for the transport infrastructure, and they want to know which investment options are more robust and which one are less robust. So it's basically a modeling and simulation study that we did here. This is basically our approach. We started with data collection, pre-processing, and then based on the data, we created a static graph theory or network transport model. And based on the static network model, we conducted criticality analysis. And on the other hand, we also built a discrete event simulation model, and based on this one, we conducted vulnerability and also robustness analysis. I was particularly involved and responsible for this part, so I can talk a lot about these 2, but I will also briefly share about the others, because specifically for the simulation model, vulnerability and robustness analysis, Jan and Alexander were more involved in that part, because it's harder anyway. Yeah. This is the result of the criticality analysis. So one way, if you want to know which one is the most important one way to figure out is to see which transport segments is most often used by the freight transport activities. It's a very general metric for evaluating criticality. And we can see here that there is a kind of corridor from the north to the southeast. So basically this is regions where foods are being produced, and this is the Chittagong seaport where the export and import activities happen. And you also have a garment production center at the middle of Bangladesh, so that's why this corridor came up. But of course, this sort of studies was not interested scientific-wise, so I figured out that from reviewing approximately 80 papers, that there are multiple metrics that we can use to calculate criticality. And in that case, I used 18 different criticality metrics that were previously used. And of course, this will result in an information overload. How would decision maker make a decision if we present them 18 different graphs? Is this too much? So first, we want to know which of these metrics are actually redundant. So which of these metrics give the same results? Because then we can say that if 2 metrics give the same results, we just have to use 1 instead of these 2 metrics. And a simple analysis using Spearman correlation was conducted between each metric with all others, where the bolder the red color or the higher the correlation, it means that the metrics present the same set of links as critical. So for instance, here between this metric and this metric, the correlation is pretty high, and it means that we can either use one of these metrics instead of using 2 of them, and we still have the same insight. And by eliminating the metrics, we end up with 6 different metrics that are not redundant or that are different to each other. And these are the bird's eye view of the metric. And as we can see here, I presented the top 100 most critical links from each different metric. And in this sense, we can give the decision maker, when they want to make investment, what is the trade-off between investing in this part than investing in the other part, for instance. Because each of these metric has its own meaning. So that's why presenting a bird's eye view is important. But of course, after we conduct the redundancy analysis. That is basically about the criticality analysis. And the second one is the vulnerability analysis, where we measure how will the transport system behave when floodings happen. So we have 6 different past flooding events, and these are the districts that are flooded in the flooding events. And we assume in the simulation model, when the districts are flooded, then the transport segments in this district, the capacity of the transport segments will be reduced. So for instance, if a road can carry 100 cars in a day, for instance, because flooding happens, it can only carry 20 or 25 cars in a day. So that's sort of reduction in capacity that we use. We evaluate 3 indicators: transport cost, travel time, and unsatisfactory time for 5 different types of goods. So we end up with 15 different parameters, 15 different indicators in the end. So transport cost for a brick, travel time for a brick, unsatisfied demand for a brick, and also for the other products. That's basically the idea. And of course, for the simulation model, we introduce uncertainties here. We have the flood events uncertainty, like I explained before, where the flood area, flood depth, flood duration were randomized, and also the reduction of the network capacity was also randomized. And we also have the socioeconomic uncertainties embedded in the model. We conducted 6,000 different scenarios before, and then this is the results of the simulation. So what we show here is a value from 0 to 10, and we measure the performance of each KPI in comparison to no flooding scenario. So if the performance is the same, then it's 10 divided by 10, for instance, it becomes 1. But then if the brick transport cost is 15, then 15 divided by 10, it's 1.5. So what I want to say is, the higher the number, then the more the goods is, the KPI is being affected by the flooding event itself. Some remarks that we can see here is for the travel time. We see that brick, garment, and textile travel time are very much influenced by the flood events, and especially for garment, for instance, there are specific flood events that make the travel time of the garments 5 times to 10 times higher than what it would be in the normal case. So for instance, if we normally transport the garment for 1 hour, then it becomes 10 hours in a very specific scenario. Another remark is for the unsatisfied demand. So sometimes when flooding happens, we cannot transport goods because, it just takes too much time to transport the goods, and it becomes unsatisfied demand. And in this case, the food and the still unsatisfied demand were very much influenced by the flooding events. And then that's for the vulnerability analysis. So we know now that when flooding occurs, which goods are much more disrupted. And the last one is we have several interventions, policy options on infrastructure. We have 12 of them that can be divided into 4 categories. We have roads upgrade and roads expansion. We have bridges upgrade, because there are a lot of old bridges there that can be easily damaged by flood. And we also have a policy of increasing the capacity of the waterways, and also we have the policy of developing the ports, the seaports even further. And we are evaluating these 12 policy options across the 15 different parameters before. This is just an example of the result here. So we see for each policy what is the influence, what is the impact to food for the 3 different KPIs. And it is a little bit difficult to read the graph at first place, but what we can see here is because we are talking about cost, time, and unsatisfied demand, so we want to minimize them. So in this sense, if the value is below 0, then it means that the policy manages to reduce the transport cost, travel time, and unsatisfied demand. But if it is more than 0, then it, on the other hand, increase the transport cost, travel time, and unsatisfied demand. So we can see the result of the simulation from this perspective, but we can also see it from a different perspective, which is more easier to comprehend. So here we have, for instance, 2 different policies. This is a development of the Chittagong port. So the one in the southeast, we develop it further. And this is the development, this will improve the capacity of critical roads that were identified in the criticality analysis. And what we can see here is, for instance, one of the government wants to improve the capacity of the Chittagong seaport, but what happens is, if we increase the capacity of the Chittagong seaport, it will only makes the KPIs worse. It will make the transport cost, travel time, and etc. even more than what it was before. Why is that the case? Because if we go back here, this is the Chittagong seaport, and there is actually only one route that connects Chittagong seaport to the rest of Bangladesh. So if we increase the capacity of this one, then more goods are transported here. But then once these roads are disrupted by floods, then more damages occur. So that is one insight that we get here, and we send a message that instead of building the Chittagong seaport, it would be wiser to build the Mongla seaport, so they have redundancy. When this part is flooded, they can still export the goods through the Mongla seaport. That is, for example.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Yeah. While if we improve the highly critical roads that were defined from the criticality analysis, it gives a sort of better outcomes, because there are a lot of cases, especially for the food and steel, where the outcomes are better compared to having no interventions. I will just skip this one. And then our current stage of the research now is, as far as I know, we have a kind of follow-up project from the World Bank, where if previously we want to know which transport segment, so which link is the most critical one, now we want to know which nodes is the most critical one, because they want to know there are a lot of inland ports along Bangladesh, so small ports that connects the river, and then they want to know which of these ports are the most critical one. So we have to see which nodes is the most critical one instead of which link is the critical one. But this is still a preliminary result. They should still be developed. And coming to the last slide, what is interesting to explore with the other researchers in our section is, first, how can, because the criticality analysis especially uses graph and network theory, how can we learn from and to each other application domains of graph and network theory? So probably with Amir, or with Scott, or with other researchers that are doing graph and network theory analysis. And the second is about what does it say for disaster response or humanitarian aid? Because as far as I know, there have been a lot of research going on, for instance, evaluating the criticality of the transport segment due to earthquake. But then our analysis here focuses on the long-term infrastructure development rather than short-term disaster response. So probably a little bit modification in the way we measure the criticality for short-term disaster response should be different. Third one is the multi-actor institutional analysis. So this is actually one question that I received during my master thesis defense from Martin de Jong. He said that, let's say I am an official from a certain district, and then based on your analysis, my district, the road in my district is not important. It is not critical. Then, so you will invest in another district instead of in my district. Then, but I will not participate in your overarching project in that sense. What would you do? Because your analysis shows that my district will not benefit anything. This sort of multi-actor institutional analysis may be interesting to be observed in the transport context, because it is still way underdeveloped. And the last one is about data processing and cleaning, which is probably also important, because
That's the final minute.
yeah, because we get the data from the Bangladesh website about the road network, and when we plot it on the map, it looks like this. So this is the official Bangladesh data that we get from the official repository. It's a mess that we have to clean it first before we can actually use it. So yeah, these are basically the 4 options that I see from this research. So thank you for the attention and opportunity, and I welcome questions.
All right. Thank you. specific question? We're also impressed by your work.
I know it's kind of outside of the scope of what you presented, but do you have a sense of how the uncertainties of a simulation model affect these results?
Yeah, this is actually this I did not
That's
have
what
to
the one slide didn't show.
and I skipped. So the x-axis here is the 15 different KPIs, and the y-axis is different uncertainties. So we see here that for each, we actually have also observed for each KPI which uncertainties actually matters, and this sort of information can give insights to the decision maker on which uncertainty or which uncertain factors that they have to monitor in order to preserve the different types of goods.
Could you say something about those 6 metrics that you identified as not redundant? Like how do they differ? What's the meaning?
These 6 metrics, yeah, I have them coded, but then let me see. So this one is the most used roads as usual, the normal metrics, and this one is the exposure of the roads network to disaster, in this case to flooding and also earthquakes. So as we can see here that there are some metrics that are critical here and it is also critical here, so we sort of know some roads that are often used are actually exposed to disaster. And this one is, let me take a look. This one is about connectivity. So connectivity is, if you remove this metric, then there are some districts that cannot reach each other. That is what is it about. And so if it is critical, then if we remove this link, for instance, then there are goods from district here to district here, for instance, that cannot be transported. And this one, the first one is about accessibility. So accessibility is a transport measure where we want to know how difficult or how easy it is to reach a certain place. And so if you remove this one, for instance, there are several regions here that are even harder to be accessed, while these are actually rural areas of Bangladesh. And the last one, 201, is the total travel cost. So we want to know if we remove this one, then the total travel cost of the whole system will go up because they have to find the alternative route is quite far from the original route, and it makes the travel cost even much higher. That is basically the redundant metrics. Yeah.
Just very quickly.
Are they theoretically redundant, or are the metrics only redundant in your case?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. So basically, as you see here, that I have, in order to define these 17 metrics, there are 3 layers, 3 conceptual layers that I observed. The first one is, I show here the paradigmatic layer, whether it is topological or system-based. So basically what I want to say is we combine between the theory, we derive the metrics from theory, then we apply it, then we see whether this redundancy applies in other cases or not, and it turns out to be not. So these results, these 6 metrics that are not redundant are case specific. When we tested it on different networks, then it shows that different metrics show up as being redundant or complementary. And it's also one future research that can be observed.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much, Branka, again.
Question and
yeah, thank you. What I'm going to present is my current work on a project that Bartel, Kenny, and me are together working on, together with Coordate, that is a Dutch-based humanitarian and development organization. And one component of this project is the International Aid Transparency Initiative and how we can use its outcomes to better inform humanitarian decision makers in their decision making. The project rationale is that we have a basic understanding of what information is needed during disaster response. For example, we have to know after an earthquake hit a country, what districts are the most severely affected, what kind of demographics we have in those districts, and what kind of relief is needed in those districts. But these are very general information needs that are more or less applicable in all disasters worldwide, and consequences of many different disaster types. What we are lacking are concrete, an understanding of concrete information needs of actual individual field workers. And that is where this project is centered around. So the idea is that we review available data that we have already, but which is not already utilized in a meaningful way in this regard, and that we identify concrete information needs of humanitarian field workers. And then we build a software prototype to match both. That we bring the data together with those information needs so that they can be better addressed in the humanitarian response. One of those data sources that we are looking at is what I mentioned, the International Aid Transparency Initiative. That is an open data initiative founded 10 years ago by international donors of development projects. For example, USAID and the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also other European country counterparts. And what we can see by looking at this data is who receives how much funds in the international development and humanitarian sphere, and what are they doing with it. Are they spending it on educational projects, on infrastructure projects, agriculture, gender equality, human rights, etc. So the broader goal of this initiative is to make the whole international development sector more transparent and to hold the actors more accountable to what they promise and what they intend to do. Before ERT, we had big problems understanding of what is actually going on in terms of international development projects in a specific country. For example, if you wanted to know what is going on in terms of international development in Afghanistan, you had to first understand, okay, who's actually doing work there. Then you had to get all the reports and query all the databases from those organizations, and then you had to unify and compare this data, which was a very difficult process. And now with ERT, we have a set of common definitions of what is a project goal, what are project outcomes, and what are indicators for achievements. So those international actors, they agreed on publishing their reporting data in those definitions, and they also agreed on linking in a central database all the data that they are publishing. So right now, for us, it is much easier to understand what is actually going on in a certain country in terms of international development. What, for example, was spent in Afghanistan in 2017, or what kind of relief efforts were conducted in the 2015 Nepal earthquake response. So we understand that ERT defines first and foremost a financing standard. So we understand from whom the money comes and where it goes, and for what this money is spent. And that is the point that is most important for us in this project, because knowing who is doing what where in a disaster-affected country is very important. For example, if you think of a country being hit by an earthquake, you want to know to what organizations you can reach out for shelter items or medical supplies, for example. So we can learn this by looking at the ERT data. Right now, over 600 ministries, NGOs, UN bodies are publishing via this standard, and this is all in one unified technical way, and that is in XML and looks more like this. That is, of course, human readable, but not very easily. But because it is a technically specified standard, we can now build software that goes through this data and understands, for example, that this is data from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. So we know this is a report from them, the money comes from them in this project. We see that this program is on human rights in Nepal, and more precisely it's on advocating against restrictions faced by women human rights defenders in Nepal. Then we have a bunch of contact information, and we see that the money goes to an NGO active in Nepal, that is the International Commission of Jurists, and we see that it is more precisely on gender equality, on reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health, and we see that the budget is 30,000 euro. So what does it mean to us in this project? We know, for example, if you think of the current ongoing armed conflicts in countries like South Sudan or the Central African Republic, where human rights violations are very common, if you come into those crises as a responder, and you look at this data, you understand, okay, this organization, this NGO is already doing work in this country, and I can reach out to them to join efforts, to understand what is the current situation in this regard in this country right now. Another example is, this is data from CAFOD, which is a UK-based Catholic relief organization. And we see that it deals with resilience and recovery in the Arga district in Nepal. And we see that the implementing organization is Coordate, our project partner in this project. And we see that the sector code of the program is 73010, which is the ERT internal code for relief, reconstruction, and housing. So by looking at this ERT data, we understand that Coordate is actually doing work in Nepal on reconstructing and housing in the Arga district in Nepal. That also helps us to understand who is doing what where in a disaster scenario. So what we try to do is looking at these ERT data and find out how we can actually improve humanitarian operations through it. And what we also saw that it mostly helps us in understanding who is doing what where in a specific country. But that might not be enough in supporting humanitarian field workers. They also need to have an operational understanding what is going on. Where are the roads blocked, what houses are damaged, how many houses are damaged in what districts, what is the number of fatalities, and so on. That is not represented in ERT, but there are other data sources we can use. For example, NGOs and UN organizations are publishing data on the humanitarian data exchange and via the humanitarian exchange language. What we can learn from these data are concretely these operational happenings in the disaster response. For example, this is a spreadsheet that was used in the Nepal earthquake response in 2015, and we see what kind of data the organizations were dealing with. And this is a very common picture that you use simple spreadsheets, because in the disaster response scenario you just don't have enough time to do really complex data collection and analysis, and you also have many field workers who don't have high IT skills. So many spreadsheets are floating around. That is why the developers and the creators of the humanitarian exchange language took this messy environment for granted, and then they came up with a set of vocabularies. That is what you see in the second line in orange. And this set of vocabularies can be added to the spreadsheets humanitarians can use in the field. And this then consequently makes it easier for information systems and software to work with this data, because you can implement those vocabularies in your tools, and then you can collect all these spreadsheets annotated with this data, and then you can create a common operational picture of what is going on. So in this project we are...
Maybe 3 minutes.
Okay. We are combining ERT and HXL data to address field workers' information needs during humanitarian operations. Our current case study is Nepal. We are currently still in the discussion with our partner. This will still be the case study area, and we still need our partner also to supply us with contacts, a potential target group with whom we can test the tool we will develop. And then we, based on what is currently known of basic information needs in the humanitarian context, we can then interview those target group members to actually retrieve concrete information needs. And then we build, based on that, we develop a software prototype that can answer the information needs with the data we have. Maybe I don't go into this, but the current status right now is that we are working on the prototype. It's a Python API, and the front end that will be used by the humanitarian responders is an Android and a JavaScript client. And in the next weeks we will travel to the case study area and collect specific information needs of our target group, and this then further influences our development, and then we have our test and evaluation in mid-April, and that is our project deadline. So that's the overview. Thanks so far.
Thank you, David.